Hi, this is Tolec for the Andromeda Council. Today is Thursday, March 8th, 2018. Welcome to this continuing, edgy, informative, and revealing new series, Deep Disclosure and Evolving Reality. Today's second segment is titled Deeper Down the Rabbit Hole. As with my first segment, my two high-level insider guests are M and Miss M. In our first segment, we addressed the backgrounds and life experiences of M and Ms. M, and touched initially on the topics of the deep state, the RV, the global currency reset, the long-time corruption and inherent problems in the existing Federal Reserve petrodollar debt-based financial system, and cryptocurrency and blockchain solutions. We also touched on how humanitarian projects might really happen. In this second segment, M and Ms. M will address the positive energy vortex of manifestation, the truth of the actual financial forgiveness program, what is happening with the energy wave event, time travel and the Mandela effect, and the 7 transdimensional realities, time loops and the looking glass, stargates and galactic commerce, including more details from M regarding a cosmic time traveler, and new information from Ms. M regarding the High Council, and more. Onward with our interview. So M and Miss M, thank you for joining me for this second segment. I'd like to address the listeners right now. There are a number of you that have made both comments and questions in the posting of the first Deep Disclosure segment, and I'm going to let both M and Miss M address some of these. So Miss M, I'm going to hand over the reins to you first.
Thank you so much, Tolec. It's great to be back. Rather than addressing each individual comment, because there were many, I'm just going to make a kind of blanket statement that will address a number of questions and concerns.
Great.
There have been some questions as to why we're not sharing our names. And the reason is not necessarily for our own personal protection, but to protect our partners as well, because it's easy to kind of connect the dots. And we are currently involved in operations that we don't want to compromise by sharing our names. Now, another reason is because we are not looking for acknowledgement or recognition. We are simply here to share the truth about what's going on so that we can invite you to participate in it at this state, because we are ready to move forward and start including more people in what we're doing.
Okay.
The next thing that I would like to say is, the 4 of us who we directly work with most often have sacrificed quite a bit to do what we've done, including losing all of our own personal money, living in cars, living in foreclosed homes, and being held captive and tortured. In fact, one of our partners is covered in scars because he refused to comply with the demands of the opposition. So we've made a lot of personal sacrifices to be here and to do this for humanity, and we have no other motive than to make this place better.
M?
I'm so happy to be back. These are such exciting times. There's so many amazing things that are happening, and there's a lot of information going around and that pertains to what is actually occurring with the takedowns and all this that we're going to get into in this show. But first we'll address some of the comments that we've chosen to respond to. But I'm very excited to be here. So concerning some of the comments that stated we're getting our info from other shows or other leaks, I want to be clear. We're the ones that every other show is actually reporting on. And now we are here to tell what the truth is and what is really happening. We can confirm some of what is being talked about also. Of course, certain operational details cannot be given because as we speak, major plans for a massive takedown are being readied and possibly implemented right at this moment. We are on the verge of massive positive change, and because we have effectively won, this is why we can start coming out and sharing this with you. Another comment was, so now are these guys going to start asking us for money? You wouldn't be able to help us for several reasons. I was actually blocked by the cabal many times from big success as well as just receiving small money. One woman that tried to help actually reported that men in black showed up at the bank stating you can't help him. And actually they put the fear of death into her, and it took her a long time to come and tell me about this. She was so scared. So we've been not only blocked, but a lot of financial trouble has plagued several of our top individuals.
Em, thank you for that specific information, and thank you for taking the opportunity to actually respond to it. I'm sure the listeners appreciate it. Ms. Em, I know that there's some information that you'd like to respond to as well, so the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. I just want to, again, reiterate that we are not looking for acknowledgement or validation. So this is just our story. This is what we're doing. This is what we've done. And you believing it or not doesn't make it fact or fiction. It just is the reality that we live in. And we still want to invite you to be a part of it. I've made references to this being a spiritual revolution because that, in fact, is what this is. It's not a financial revolution. That's just step one, is freeing us from our financial shackles so that we can live our true spiritual lives. Now, our idea of spirituality is a little bit different, though it's actually pretty much the same as many religions around the world, in that there is a personal responsibility for your own soul growth. And so when we talk about taking back our power, and this is one of the things that a lot of people took issue with that I said in the last show about using organic products or treating our bodies like our temples. Well, it's a myth that it's more expensive to use organic products or people and planet friendly products. In fact, the dish soap that I use is around $2. So if you keep telling yourself that myth that you can't afford it, then you're certainly excluding yourself from improving your life. Now, the other aspect of that is that it's about taking responsibility and making changes for yourself. And there's this other myth that goes along with some of these distribution of wealth programs, that we are entitled to this money because we're going to turn around and help others. Well, if you can afford to buy organic, then what you're doing is you're helping drive down the cost for everyone else. So if you really want to help humanity, start by doing these little things. It's very simple and it's very easy. And if you are willing to commit to that, then maybe you're willing to commit to doing even more life-changing things that are going to help the planet as well.
Okay. So how does this tie into the people who have currency and are excited about receiving funds so that they can begin their projects? I know that there are some important issues that need to be addressed, and people aren't just going to open their hands and go, oh, money. There's a process involved.
Absolutely. So we are still working out the details again on how we are going to fund these projects. However, that is the ultimate goal, is to fund humanitarian projects. And what I mean by that are these are projects that are either social or environmental or technological in nature that help people on a massive scale. But we need to treat them like we would any other business. You know, you have to have certain things in place in order to receive that funding. And it's not just for us to judge you. That's not the case. We really want to include other people that want to help. It's so that we can ensure your success And there are certain ways that businesses are run. And even though this money may be considered grant money, there are certain standards and things that you have to do first.
Sure. Yeah, they're typical business practices. Having spent time in the venture capital world myself, I know that even with angel money, what's termed as angel money, which is money of lesser amounts, the people that are handing over that money still expect to see an executive summary of 3 or 4 pages that explains what this project is. A business plan that is concise, that makes sense, that lays out specific plans and specific rollouts and measurable areas of accomplishment before other levels of money are received. Pretty typically also, there's got to be at least 5 years of pro forma financials. These are standard practices as to whether it's the venture capital world, whether it's the grant funding world. These are just standard practices that are expected when people are going to hand over money. So are these the kinds of things that you're talking about that people should expect to plan for?
Yes, absolutely. And there's also a spiritual aspect to it as well, in that we manifest the reality that we live in. So when you have an idea and you have a vision, the next thing is to bring that vision and idea into fruition. And in order to do that, we have to start manifesting that. So spending your time and your energy writing out these details and putting it down on paper is the next step in manifesting that reality. And I'm going to talk about something else that's a little bit different in as far as manifesting the reality and how our thoughts shape our reality. But like many of you, I often get frustrated by the lack of intervention from the people that are helping us outside of our dimension or in the inner earth. And one of the things that they responded to me in saying was that they're limited as to how much they can step in.
True.
Because we live in a system of free will here. And so as long as people are co-signing their enslavement and asking for it by buying into a false reality, there's a limit to how much intervention they can bring. So if we want to live in the reality that we deserve, we have to start manifesting that by saying that we are free, that we are empowered, that we can do these things, that we're not asking for permission for them. And we need to also acknowledge that the door has always been open and that the keys have been in our hands the whole time. And it's up to us to walk out and stand up and be in the light.
Kind of like taking back our power.
Yes.
So, Em, I understand there's some very specific topics that you'd like to address in segment 2, so I'll turn it over to you. Go ahead.
Alrighty, thanks. Yeah, so in this segment, we're essentially going to hand you the red pill, if you will. It's our intent to share on subjects that many people are talking about and thinking about in a variety of ways out there. We have more depth and details from our own firsthand experiences and that of our top partners than just about anybody we know. Again, we're laying groundwork in these first 2 segments, setting up a firm foundation for this deeper content. And since we can't speak specifically on the operational details of what's happening with the military tribunal and the last straws concerning the shutdown of the Federal Reserve and those who run it, we'll have to stay tuned to Q for more on those subjects and timing. But we can say that Q is aware of us, and we know he works close too with some of our top individuals. He did reference our team recently, and we'll touch on that a little bit later in the show. By the way, he did make a cryptic reference to MSM, Miss MSM, Miss Health. It's extremely important, though, to talk about the positive energy vortex of manifestation. What if all the minds that are waiting on the false RV GCR were focused on the truth of the financial forgiveness program? This is an important aspect. We will be abolishing the Fed and also the debt that was created by fraud. Something which is under or after fraud doesn't exist, so we really shouldn't have to pay that, now should we? It's time to tell the truth and stop perpetuating all these lies. So this focused intent is very powerful, Let's embrace the truth together and manifest the reality that we know we deserve.
Em, thank you for that official kickoff and looking at some specific elements that we're going to be addressing in greater detail here in segment 2. Miss Em, you have some of your own thoughts and comments.
Yes, I want to talk about some of the stuff that's affecting us right now on a planetary scale because it's really important, and it's important for us to kind of get out in front of this so that we can use it to its highest potential. So what I am referring to, and a lot of people are talking about, is the event that it's occurring this month, the solar event that's happening. Now, I'm going to talk about my personal experience in kind of uncovering this and figuring out what it was with my communications with the High Council. And so about a year ago, I was sitting in my backyard and I heard a voice pop into my head, and it simply said, "Remember this time. Remember when you were one of the few people on this planet that knew what was going on. Because an event is coming that will change the world as you know it." Now, we've talked again about how this is a revolution. And so the revolution in itself is not an event. So I determined that they were speaking about something very specific that was going to happen that would change things drastically. And because of this, I started looking into it a little bit more, trying to figure out exactly what they were talking about. They also made a reference to me that a lot of what was going to start with the financial rollout and moving forward into phase 2 would happen after 3 days of darkness. Now, I believe that 3 days of darkness is a metaphor and not a reality. And there's a lot of fear that's surrounding that. I believe it may be attached to some of the disclosure that we're going to be exposed to in the next few weeks here.
Okay. So I'm curious, how does this upcoming cosmic solar event, how is it going to manifest change in people and all life forms on this planet, or maybe just address people?
Okay, so we have been hit by a series of waves coming from the sun, and each one of those waves raises our frequency. The planet vibrates at a certain frequency, and this is scientific fact. You can look it up. It's referred to as the Schumann resonance. And that has been spiking over the last few years to levels higher than it's ever been. So each one of these waves that hits us brings us a little bit higher and raises our frequency and pushes us a little farther into this golden age of peace and prosperity. And so the thing about it is that these waves that hit us, they affect us whether we understand what they are or not. And for a long time, they were being filtered by some of our friends in the sky, because what they do is they amplify whatever it is that you're feeling. And so if you are in a place of fear, if you're in a place of anxiety or depression, it's going to amplify that. It's going to amplify those feelings of hopelessness, because it really is just amplifying what you're resonating. If you're in a good place, it's going to make you feel quite fantastic. Right. So that is why it's important to be in a positive place and to understand what's really going on so that we can maximize this effect. Now, energy is frequency, it's light. We know that it travels through, information travels through this light, and it opens us up and it weaves through us. And so essentially getting hit with a massive wave of light from the sun, which is source energy, raises the consciousness on the planet. And one of the things that the council has explained to me is that this contributes to a dropping of the veils, because illusion and deceit can't live in a higher vibration. It's more transparent the higher we go. Right. And so that is how it affects the people on the planet. And some of the more recent words that they said to me in just this week's download were that the wave is coming, and only the righteous and faithful will be saved from this, and the rats will scurry. And now they have a tendency to talk very poetic and cryptic. And so I kind of translate that into everyday human speak.
Sure.
And basically what it meant to me was that those of us who have opened up our hearts to the light, those of us who, and even if you don't know these terminologies, verbiage that a lot of us on the front lines know about ascension and love and light and all of this, but people who are vibrating from an open, clear heart are going to have a greater time assimilating to this new energy, whereas people are holding a darker frequency, a lower vibration, and are shrouded in fear, are going to have a very hard time with this higher frequency that's hitting the planet.
Okay, so rather than me assuming anything, I just won't, and I'll ask the question straight up. How does this coming cosmic wave, this large-scale solar event, how is this one going to be different than any one that's preceded it?
I would say that the first ones were like precursors. Okay. Every single one that's happened has allowed us to assimilate a little bit more, so that when
adjust.
So this is like this is the big one. This one is bigger than all the ones that we've felt, and they've been growing in intensity since January. So I don't know if anybody else has experienced this, but I certainly have, and a lot of the people around me have as well, is that over the last 2 months, there has been a very intense energy on this planet where I've had trouble sleeping. I feel like I'm bracing for impact. And I'm like, my jaw is clenched and I'm full of energy. And when I lay down at night to go to sleep, I'm just wide awake. And so this is part of the energy that's coming from the sun. And it's been increasing in intensity. So we're currently in another flare right now that we'll feel the effects of until the 11th. And then we'll have like 3 days down. And we'll start to feel the main event by the 15th of March. And it will peak sometime between the 18th and 20th of March, where the highest wave of energy will hit us. Now, some people have described this as something that we may see visually. I'm not sure about that. I don't know. Maybe we will. We have been seeing a lot of rainbows in the sky. We've been seeing a lot of strange lights that I don't recall seeing throughout my life. But what I've seen visually and the way that they've described it to me is basically this blanket of light that hits the planet and envelops it. And goes around it and through it, kind of like a tube torus. Okay. And that this really, it's the first one that fully covers the whole planet and kind of pushes us farther down our path. And this is not the end. So we're not going to wake up and things are just going to be different, or, you know, everything's going to be perfect and we're living in like this heaven reality. Right.
But it's a major vibratory bump up.
Yes. So we still have a lot of work ahead of us. So it will still take us a few years to unravel the corruption that has taken hold on this planet. But things will start to get better right away. And essentially what we're doing is ripping off the Band-Aid. Because what people are about to learn about who really runs our planet and what's going on here could be quite disturbing. And so this flare of energy that's opening people up and raising their consciousness is going to help them to accept what the truth really is and be ready to work towards a better world for everyone.
Ms. M., thank you for shedding insight and light, if you will, regarding this upcoming solar event, which it sounds like is going to change many people's lives. Em, I know that you have some additional information that you'd like to address. Go ahead.
Yeah, one thing before I jump into that, I wanted to follow up with what Miss M was saying is that for decades there's been other things that have been lifting consciousness and activating higher awareness, I suppose we could call it. Cosmic events with astrological alignments, eclipses, blood moons, all this sort of thing has been really shifting and lifting for some time. So this is kind of a next level type of cosmic wave. And so it's going to be very exciting and interesting to watch. And it is very important to understand that in the coming days, there is indeed a plan to start a more public takedown of the cabal members here in the USA, as many abroad have already been brought down. It's time that the final dirty deed doers get exposed and cleaned up. These are going to be very victorious and exciting times for some, and others are going to think that Trump's conducting a civil war. And we have to, check our thoughts. Many out there are not understanding the full picture and that Trump is a white hat and doing many good things behind the scene. So fear not, because this revolution is long overdue, and the white hats and light workers do hold the upper hand with all the military and gold aligned behind them. So the phrase, "he who has the gold rules," will now be from a positive place for humanity. The rest of this show and across continuing segments, we will demonstrate why there is no need to be concerned about the few who hold the wealth of the world, namely our partners, because the cabals tried to steal it away many times, and they're no longer able to stop the global transformation. And so across these next segments, we're going to continue to show you the hearts and the spirit and soul of those that have the reins now. So the trading of the guard that many have talked about, and the the end of this tyranny is upon us, and we're going to be able to find the trust and the faith in those that have been chosen by obviously a divine higher hand, an invisible hand. So now that we've sort of taken the red pill, we're going to shift into the truth is stranger than fiction segment within this show that goes further down the rabbit hole.
Em, I know that you have some specific information regarding time travel and the Mandela effect and 7 transdimensional realities, which also has to do with time loops and the looking glass. These were some of the topics that you shared with me that we'd be going into some detail about in this segment too. So you also mentioned a guy by the name of Cosmo, who's a cosmic time traveler. Why don't you tell me about that guy first and how it all ties together?
All right, sure. Back in about 1992, I met this gentleman. It was at a gathering that we were conducting called We Walk-Ins for Evolution. And this guy basically had the weirdest stories I've ever heard. It was a big red pill to swallow at that time. And so he was telling me that he was from the 23rd century and that his soul was, and that he remembered his life there, and that he was here to help us optimize the 2012 window. As we approached the photon belt at that time, it was important that we had enough people awake on the planet. And so he also told me that we'd done this 6 times before. And I asked him, what do you mean? Well, if we don't optimize that window, we have to start all over again from like 3103 BC. And so I kind of freaked and was like, oh my God, we better get this right this time. I can't even imagine that. But frankly, I apparently did have a little bit of a go back, because I went out of my body, apparently, this thing that happened to me in 2006, whereby I was driving down the road and all of a sudden I was disoriented and I was back about 10 mile markers, or 10 exits anyways. And it was recently that I was talking with the Galactic Council, or the High Council, through Miss M, and they were indicating that I went off planet a few places and back to ancient Egypt. So we were fine tuning, which also leads into the Mandela effect. So, I like to call it sort of, tweaking the timeline for the optimal outcome. But these 7 transdimensional realities, he told me, much like the movie, or rather the television show Fringe, that each one is staggered 10 years apart, and they've all been through this optimization window and have perfected, the raising of consciousness. But then we come to learn that we've really been reducing the number of future timelines and perfecting the unity timeline, so that the timelines that have bad AI don't exist anymore. And so I think that it's important to mention that it took 5 years of this guy getting to know me, that he actually revealed much more to me about like who I am and what part of the mission I'm doing. And so when I began to tell you about this story, there is a divine dispensation or a divine intervention, an invisible hand that's orchestrating all this. Frankly, he called them synchronicity engineers. We're working overtime to have all these people meet each other, to participate in this at the right time. It was quite an undertaking.
Okay, and that makes a lot of sense. Ms. M is looking at me and wants to comment on specifically these topics of the 7 transdimensional realities, the Mandela effect, and time loops. So go ahead and share with me what you'd like to.
Yes. Okay. So some people may not be familiar with the terminology or the term Mandela effect. And so what that is that there have been things in our reality that have been changing. And at first they kind of go unnoticed because they could be little things that we don't know, but it's specifically called the Mandela effect because of the fact that there are a large portion of us on the planet that remember Nelson Mandela dying in the 1980s and then in prison of cancer, and then his wife becoming the president of South Africa. However, in the timeline that we currently live in, that is not what happened. Nelson Mandela was released from prison and became the president of South Africa and died just a couple years ago. So that was one of the major ones. There are other ones that we've noticed, in reference to the Bernstein Bears, which in this timeline are called the Berenstain Bears. Jiffy peanut butter, that doesn't exist here. And then some changes to the Bible. So if you went and picked up an old copy of the Bible off the shelf of your bookshelf and you opened it up, some of the famous verses that you've known throughout your life will have changed. They are no longer the same. So one of them is, I believe it's Isaiah 11:6, and it refers to the lion laying with the lamb.
Yes, I've heard
Well,
this.
it doesn't say that anymore. Now it says the calf shall dwell with the wolf. And that's certainly not what we remember. I personally grew up Catholic, and even the worst of Catholics know the Our Father prayer. That's like the one that you know. So, and we remember it saying, "Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us." Well, now it says, "Forgive us our debts." And so these are little changes that have all occurred because of a collapsing of these timelines. Now, I was not aware of this phenomenon for a long time. I lived outside of this world, but I still physically felt these things happen. So back in the early 2000s, I physically felt 2 of the timeline collapses happen, where I was in my bedroom and I bent over to pick something up, and when I stood up, I was disoriented, and I was acutely aware of the fact that I was in a different life, that this was not the life that I lived in. Everything was almost exactly the same, but it was slightly different, and I knew it wasn't my life. And then I came to start seeing a bunch of things changing, and this happened a few more times over the next few years. One of them resulted in me being in a car accident, and a lot of other people have experienced this as well, where you all of a sudden are, unaware of your surroundings, and you cause an accident. And this is a collapsing of those timelines. And so I definitely feel like we've done this multiple times, and I'm certainly feeling like, oh my God, I hope this is the last time. And I know a lot of people have felt that as well. And just to speak to that, this being the last one and us being done with this, about 2 years ago, it was before I made my last move to where I am now, and I was visited by Babaji, and one of the things that he said to me was, and this is very cryptic, again, they say like these really cryptic things, is, when we are one, then we are done. And so that was in a way referencing us becoming one unity consciousness timeline. And so this is how these trans-dimensional realities have affected us, and this is how it's affected our reality. And there are a lot of different theories about what has caused the Mandela effect, and some of the stuff that we're going to share with you in a little bit will kind of enlighten you as to why we believe that this is the one and only cause of this phenomenon. So there's that. The other thing that I wanted to address also was what M was speaking about, and his interactions with Cosmo. Now, I never actually got to meet him on this planet. He was crossed over, but before I joined the team in the physical.
Okay.
But 2 years ago, I started channeling these very long and complicated mathematical formulas. And now, I never reached this level of math, even in college. So, so the fact that I was writing these things was kind of a shock to me. It's kind of an automatic writing situation. And some of the symbols and stuff were completely unfamiliar to me. And I was also drawing these graphs, and one of them was the golden mean ratio, the nautical, and it was broken down into little pie chunks. And he was showing me that each one of these little pie chunks was a different formula. And once you know all of them, then you can create matter out of thin air.
Okay.
So these formulas were basically the formulas for the fabric of the universe. And it was a system of math that Cosmo created that he referred to as metavariants. Now, I didn't know what this was when I started writing it down. So I shared it with M, the charts and the formulas, and he recognized it immediately from his time with Cosmo. And so that's when I knew who I was speaking with, and he was giving me this information. And it's a form of math that's very advanced, and it's 4 different kinds of math put together, where it's a quantum physics and trigonometry and algebra and an off-planet math that come together to create this. And so some of the things are like star glyphs that are in these formulas. And so I think that that lends to some more kind of profound stuff that M is going to share about his experience with Cosmo here on the planet.
So I had the opportunity to spend over a decade with this man in and out of my life. We lived together at different times. And I also found it interesting that he told me that in these white budget projects that he was a part of, apparently they invited him to be a part of it because he solved some kind of, or created some kind of mathematical formula, which is beyond what Miss M was just sharing, by the way. And he did this when he was 17. So
wow.
When he was telling me that he knew about my dad and his system, that they worked with it in one of these deep underground white budget projects, creating a positive artificial intelligence system. They used my dad's system as the backbone.
Okay.
And I think this is also a great place to sort of segue into some of the other areas we'll be talking about in relationship to the looking glass, because the Master General who worked around Area 51 building the new, at the time it was the only, like the first financial system. So we can't really call it a new one, but it was new then.
And this is back when? As
This
a time
is
reference?
in the 40s.
Okay. All right.
Yep. And so that system ended up interfacing with my dad's system. By the way, when we mentioned that my dad's system is the one that ran the Federal Reserve and the interbank screens and all this kind of stuff, right?
Okay.
So the first system was actually one that was utilizing galactic or cosmic computing, way more advanced than we have today.
Wow.
And yeah, so we're going to tell more about this story and different aspects around this. But one thing I also wanted to follow up with the cosmic scientist, Cosmo, he said that these 7 transdimensional realities, once this was complete, they would all collapse into one. So he might have been referring to timelines. I'm not really sure. But the things that he told me that I just thought were really way out there just kept getting confirmed over and over. Like one time he told me that he took a trip to Egypt and he was shown some things. I can maybe tell more about this later in another segment, but he didn't want to tell me this until, this was like more than 5 years after knowing him. He really was making certain that, I was who I was, like my heart was pure and, I was really on my path.
That makes sense.
But he basically was revealing that he had proof that I was indeed traveling to the past in these alternate timelines when it didn't go the way that we wanted. And they actually showed him some evidence of that proof. And when I first met him, he kind of freaked out looking at me and was like, told me, all these years later, remember when I freaked out? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, because, I had seen you before. And I talked about third party, the importance of third party confirmations in the first segment. And so I've had many that have confirmed, like when I went to Egypt and met the top guard of the Great Pyramid, he freaked out also. And my friend was like, I thought this was your first time to Egypt. I'm like, it is. And it was a very awkward moment.
No.
Because this guard guy was saying, I know him. And I left the room, and later I asked my friend, because it was so awkward, like, what was that all about? Yeah, he said that he's seen you before inside the Great Pyramid. And I don't remember doing that. But just like when I jumped out of my body and went wherever I went, or if they took me out, I don't have all the absolute detail of this other than this is my life, this is what's happening, and I'm coming out to share that I believe in my heart that there is a divine orchestration, and we really have one, and we really are able to begin to bring solutions to the planet.
So is Cosmo's role, or was his role while he was here on planet with you, as a teacher or a guide or somebody who was supposed to share specific information at specific moments? Do you have a sense for what his role was?
Well, that's interesting, because I think we were mentors to each other, because there were things that I shared with him that he didn't know, and things that he shared with me that I didn't know. So it was constructive in both ways.
Right.
And I know that Miss M wants to kind of go a little bit deeper on the Master General and some things that tie all this together. One final remark, though, is on the looking glass subject. The interesting thing about I'd heard about it from Andy Basiago.
Yeah, sure.
And different people, but when it showed up around me in my life from two angles in the same week, this is when I started to pay attention. This is real. And, when basically one of my IT partners said that he was tagged and pulled in a decade ago, that he was basically being handled because he was one of the people that was going to be instrumental in a new system in the future. And he's like, how do you know that? And the people that tagged him said, well, we saw it in a projector. And he's like, well, where did you get that? Well, from the ETs. And so we know who you are in the future, and we're here to make sure you make it. So
very insightful.
So we have a few people that have stories like that. And maybe we'll share more as time permits. But
okay. So Ms. M, you want to chime in here and share what your thoughts are on this topic?
Sure. So, I mean, shocker, right? The looking glass is real. And,
yeah, surprise.
And our group was what they saw in that looking glass. And so what's interesting about that, too, is that so they knew who we were or who we were going to be in the future, and inserted themselves into our lives to make sure that certain events occurred. Now, when they first had this information, I don't believe they were on our side. They weren't. They were. They saw us as disruptors in the future of governments and systems that they had established to run the planet. And so when they first detected us and then set out to find us, they weren't necessarily doing it to help. It was more of a surveillance tactic and to make sure that they had us under control, which they were unable to do. And so eventually they discovered that they were not on the right side of things, and they turned and became the team that's helping us today.
So, Ms. M, I'm going to ask some questions so that both I understand and hopefully the audience will understand not only the greater context of what you're saying, but the specifics that you're addressing. Are you saying that looking glass is what these people were using technology to learn about who you guys were sometime up the timeline? In terms of this team of people that was coming together to cause positive disruptive change. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, they discovered who we were in the looking glass, and it was technology that they received from extraterrestrials.
Okay.
And so it was an advanced technology. Now it kind of works like it's like watching a movie, so you're not getting the context of, it's not so much like watching a movie, you're watching clips. So you're not getting the full context of who these players are and what they actually do. You're getting some information about them. And of course, in the 40s, none of us were alive yet. So they're
using this technology to look up the timeline to see who some of these positive disruptors of change would be.
Yeah.
And they see you and M and likely some other people.
Several.
It was an entire group of people. I wouldn't say we haven't had confirmation of every single person that was seen in there.
Okay.
We've just had confirmation from our sources that are assisting us that is how they discovered our group. I'll just say our group of people.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so after discovering you guys and then observing you for a while, and maybe some other incidences that caused them to switch sides, if you will, from being, if you will, not pro you and observers to being supporters of you and pro you and the rest of the team. Am I saying this right?
Yeah, I would say, well, it was a combination of things that made them switch sides. One was becoming aware of who they were serving, and it wasn't a good cause that they were serving, and becoming aware that we were actually working for the light and not against the government, or not not in trying to cause destruction, even though we were being disruptive. And also after years and years of inserting themselves into our life and shutting us down and crippling us financially, we kept rising up. We kept coming back and refocusing our attack, and we would never give up. And so this kind of led them to see us in a different light as well, because they're like, who are these people who are moving mountains with pennies and who are making global changes without any actual like world power?
Right, right. Em, you look like you want to contribute to this conversation. Go ahead.
Well, it's also important to realize that far back, like in the 30s and the 40s, they didn't know that there was, a light side and a dark side. They were just following orders and just, it was about dominance for your country.
Right.
I think you were going to also say more about Tesla because...
Yeah, is there some relevance to Nikola Tesla and all of these topics that we're addressing right now?
Absolutely, and I think that it's time to introduce another one of our partners. We'll refer to him as M2 from this point on, and
Okay.
and this is how Tesla fits into all of this. So the Tesla papers have recently been declassified, and some may wonder why those were classified in the first place and why the government felt the need to keep them private. And it's something that the white hats, and I really want to make clear that these people are patriots that are working for us and with us on deep within the shadows and working behind the scenes. They really are good people. It's just like, again, what Em said, there was no light and dark when they started their jobs.
Right. They were government workers
Yeah.
or quasi-government workers that had a specific role and they were following orders. And
Yeah.
Got
So
it. Okay.
Okay. So this brings us to, I'm going to tell a little story about our partner M2. We'll call him M2.
Sure.
So we were living down in Florida at the time, and he had just come back from a trip in Asia where he was doing some asset inventory, and he was sleeping in bunkers and sleeping on boxes, and him and our other partner have like traveled around the world, establishing the network of players that we needed to accomplish all of this and getting all the necessary pieces in place for what we're about to do. And so he had just come back, and we were all there in Florida, and we were up all night and talking about all this stuff and about his trip, and I decided to do a reading for him because this is the first time that I had done this for him as an individual. And oftentimes my readings consist of connecting with crossed over loved ones as a medium. And so I'm talking to his grandmother and his great aunt, and they're talking about their cookies, and then and then all of a sudden this full apparition appears in the corner of his living room. And this does not happen often. So I see these things in my head. I see, I feel their energy, I feel their presence, and they're not often full apparitions in the room that I'm in. And so this obviously was a powerful being, but being that we're talking about such normal family stuff, I didn't identify him at first. And so I see this man, and he's quite tall, and he's kind of gaunt, and he's wearing this wool suit that looks like early last century, and
Sure.
He's got a thick black mustache and wavy hair, and
Okay.
that's parted in the middle, and he identifies himself as Nikola.
Tesla.
So
Right.
I'm like, M2, is this your grandfather? Do you have a grandfather named Nikola? And he was like, Nikola Tesla? And obviously I recognized him immediately.
Sure.
After I made the connection. I was just surprised to see him. So he begins to show me a series of events. And this is one of the reasons why the military had classified his work. Tesla perfected time travel in his life. And he created a time machine. And so our partner's great-grandfather was friends with Tesla. And when they were conducting these experiments with time travel, and they often used kids, which you'll learn if you know about the Pegasus project or the JUMP project, that
Of
they
course.
use younger people for this. And I don't know why specifically, scientifically, why they do that. It has something to do with the size of their body and their molecular structure, and it's easier to transport them. So I see Tesla and M2's great-grandfather looking at a young boy playing with blocks, and then I see them in a basement with a time machine, and I identify it as a time machine because it looks awfully like the cover of The Time Machine by H.G. Wells.
Okay.
And so then I see the boy go into the machine and pop out in an open field, and then come back to the machine. And so we discovered that night that M2's great-grandfather had been working on time travel with Tesla, and then his grandfather later grew up to be a significant member of the military. Now, he was assassinated at a young age, but the Master General worked alongside him. And
Okay, so
therefore,
who's this person? Master General?
the Master General is the one that received the Looking Glass technology.
Okay.
So he's the one that was running Area 51. And so he
Got it.
knew who M2 would be in the future because of this, because of that Looking Glass technology, and because he had worked with his grandfather. And so he was one of the easier people to identify that was seen in the Looking Glass. And so this also speaks to what we were talking about earlier with the Mandela effect. A lot of people believe, one of the theories is that time travel is the cause of this, that people traveling through time make little changes. I don't believe that's possible because we've been using time travel for a century. And
In this timeline.
We'll
keep
so
going.
if we were making all those changes, we wouldn't recognize the world we live in at all. And also, that technology, the Looking Glass technology, came through Stargate, which the military has also been using for all this time. And we know about that because our partners have traveled through these Stargates. And our other partner, who we'll talk about a little bit more later, is the one that's traveled through these Stargates to multiple planets. And so if Stargate technology were causing these changes, we would also have a lot more changes on the planet as well, because these Stargates have been used to do commerce with multiple other planets in the multiverse, and also as a means of establishing a connection to our galactic community. So those are two pretty major things. We have time travel, and we also have Stargate technology that allow us to travel interdimensionally. And Nikola Tesla was a major factor in these things coming to light.
Okay. Do you happen to know how long the use of Stargate technology has been going on? 50 years, 60?
Ed may know that. I'm not sure.
Well, I think it's important to put everything into perspective. The top guy that we said we would talk more about, he was trained by the Master General.
Okay.
In many things, and he was a terminal operator. One of the ones that the Cabal was thumbing to release money for them, and the top man spent a lot of time down in Antarctica with the 3 million year old computer, which there are operations to shut that down because it is emanating some negative things that are not necessarily going to be productive with these waves hitting us and all this. But, so what we've been told is that the technology has been around for millions of years, including the technology to video record ancient events. So in this computer, they have the history of the planet in great detail. And so they also know who we are from our past lives. They've connected all that together.
Okay.
And I think it's also significant to mention that there's a correlation, obviously, to the secret space program. All these things, as we indicated at the beginning of the show, are interconnected. And I wanted to make one mention that when we said that we provide a lot of this information that other people are talking about, several of our top partners, including myself, have talked to David Wilcock. I spent 3 hours on the phone with him, divulging quite a few things to him, and suggested that we work together more closely because it's really imperative that we cooperate now and collaborate. I also met, as did Miss M, Corey Good at a conference, and I told him a little bit about who we were. He passed me off to his assistant, and I emailed him, and he's never gotten back to us yet. We hope that he does. Maybe if these guys ever hear this, we want to work together. We are the ground crew, as well as, we're aware of our interdimensional self. So you could call us Sky Crew too. So we're all one working on this. And I just think it's important to realize that we're in the final, moments, and coming together is what it's all about.
Yeah. Well, we certainly all have a responsibility and a role, if we choose to pursue it, to make a difference in this world, and you guys are making a difference in your own unique way. So if this Master General had responsibility for this technology, what I was trying to understand is he and, for lack of better words, the U.S. government at that time was using this looking glass technology to find out who the disruptors of positive change would be up the timeline track.
That happened later because at first, it was really about putting all these things in place to have this dominance, to have this upper hand. Okay. So it was more important to learn how all this stuff worked, to access, because
to them, it was more important to them.
Yeah, like they had some kind of terminal that allowed them to access this ancient computer, and so that was primary focus.
Okay, and so can you tell me time-wise, when was that going on?
Well, this was again, Area 51 stuff in the early days of Area 51.
So 40s and 50s as they were building that. And so
in other words, the Roswell crash, there were things on there that enabled them to tap into technology, and there very well may have been another type of terminal that allowed them to access, this galactic system.
Right.
So we mentioned that I know from my own personal experience that things have come through stargates. Maybe in a later show I'll share more about that, but I'm going to pass it off to Miss M.
All right, thank you.
Well, I think there's one other tidbit that might put some time reference into
please.
When they started looking for the people in the glass. And we were made aware a couple of years ago of an operation that was conducted by the military, our government. Let's say that our government and some outside entities. I want to say the Vatican was a part of this collection service. But back in the 70s, they started collecting blood samples from every baby that was born. They collected 2 vials, one that went to our government and one that went to a foreign entity. And don't quote me on this. I believe it was the Vatican, but it may have been someone else. It's just been there's a lot of information. It's been a long time since I heard this. So they were aware of specific DNA that was entering into the planet. And so this was one of the means they used to identify people. Another aspect of this is is that they started going through people's garbage and collecting DNA samples. And that probably happened maybe in the early 80s. And also, when they identified certain individuals, myself included, and they wanted more samples of our DNA, they would figure out a way to hospitalize us so that they could collect that blood. So when I was in I believe I was in the second grade and I was hospitalized with pneumonia, and I was kept on a very strange ward in the hospital, and they just kept coming and taking my blood over and over again for 3 days before I was finally cured and allowed to leave the hospital. So I don't have personal confirmation as to what it is they saw of me in this technology. But I do know that I was under surveillance before I started working with these people, so I know that they must have had an idea of my participation, whether they know today or not what that participation was.
Okay, and so if I can sort of put a summary on this topic of Stargates and the Looking Glass and the relevance of you and your team, there were people who were watching you closely back then through advanced ET technology to find out who you would be in the future that are essentially now your positive mentors because they change sides. Is that a good way to say it?
Yeah, that's correct.
I would say, yeah. I mean, I think they may have even been looking for us before then. They had identified who our parents would be.
Yeah, because they do look generational. I do know that.
And one of the confirmations that I have of this is there's a man who's known as Anton Zander LaVey. And he was the head of the Satanic Church. And he took a personal interest in my mother when she was 14 years old and started spending time with her, taking her to parties.
When she was 14?
Yeah.
All right.
And so this was back in the 1960s. Now, why was the head of the Satanic Church targeting my mother?
Good question. Okay.
Why was he inviting her to elite parties? And so you see some of these parties with the images from Illuminati parties where they're wearing these weird head things.
The hoods. Right.
The hoods. Well, my mom was going to these when she was a teenage girl.
Okay.
And there's a famous photograph of a woman laying on an altar.
Right.
With this long, like, palomino blonde hair. Well, this is my mother's childhood best friend. And they were both being groomed, let's say, by the Satanic Church. And I believe that they knew she would be my mother and that they inserted themselves into her life.
This is kind of like Teal Swan, sort of that ritualistic.
Yeah.
They brought her in for specific reasons to be used over and over again.
Yeah, and so I think it was in order to try and prevent my birth or to try and control who I would become. Now, I am grateful to say that my mother wised up to what was going on.
Good.
Not necessarily being a part of something great. And she removed herself from their grasp. And so that didn't affect me later in life, but I do know that they were interfering with my path all the way back then.
That's absolutely fascinating. So can you tell me what they were looking for or what they were discovering?
I could take that in the DNA. I told you that we have access to higher levels of intel than most. And so through that, we know that they discovered more strands of DNA than previously was thought. In fact, just a normal human who would be considered a carbon-based entity or biological being, or however you want to imagine, is 26 strands, not 12. 26. And so some may form conjecture that, junk DNA is being awoken, whatever. I mean, it doesn't really matter because there's even more than 26 strands. So they discovered that there's a silica-based DNA structure, and it has 32 strands. And it's very interesting, too, to realize that a lot of people in the spiritual community talk about indigo children, crystalline children.
Sure.
Well, there's scientific proof now. Of course, it's not, hitting any of the magazines or
it's not mainstream
white papers or anything like that. But there's crystalline structured DNA with 36 strands. So as we evolve, we do have, because I've heard people talk about even higher, is it possible to have 144 strands of DNA? Well, I believe it is. The higher dimensional beings or the higher frequency beings or, whatever you want to imagine probably do have more strands than even 36.
So in looking at Miss M and all the blood that was being taken by children, you're saying that the reason they were doing this is to specifically look at DNA patterns.
Mm-hmm. And when they learned that there was such a thing as a 36 crystalline structured DNA, 36 strand being, they were like concerned. Think of, X-Men, like what are these beings going to be able to do?
Okay. And yeah, I'm not sure if I'm on the right track here, so just bear with me. Are you telling me that in these blood extractions and discoveries of DNA, they were finding current, if you will, or recent organic humans that already had advanced skills, advanced superhuman abilities, if you will,
well,
in existing humans?
This is what they wanted to find out,
Okay.
And so through more research, because they were really doing that sampling in the 80s.
Okay.
Discovering these differences. So yeah, absolutely.
They
did learn that there's beings with more advanced capabilities.
And are these beings? Are we seeing them today in what Mary Rodwell is calling indigo children, or crystal children, or star children, and all these? Because as you both know, there are a lot of kids that are around these days that have really advanced what people would term psychic powers, communication abilities, telepathic abilities. And Ms. M, what do you think?
I do believe these are the ones carrying the extra strands of DNA for sure. I think that we're not limited by birth by the amount of strands that we have. I think that if you're a carbon-based life form, you don't need to remain that. Our DNA is evolving constantly. Everything that we do, even our emotions, recode our DNA. Yeah. And so, laughter can recode your DNA, gratitude, joy, those things can lengthen your strands and add more to it. And so I believe that there are waves of children incarnating today that are carrying that DNA already, that they haven't gone through the process of being stripped of it. Wow. In order to hold the space on this planet for the 1,000 years to come.
Well, it's interesting, at least from this perspective, that this is happening now in the evolutionary development of the human race at this moment on this time track, as we're about to experience this new solar wave event, A, and B, that this is all happening simultaneously as this solar system, inclusive of this planet, is moving through this area of space of higher dimensional and higher frequency, if you will, higher vibratory rate. It's all of these pieces have a role in a cause and effect on the development of the human race.
Yeah, all of the alignments that we're going through, all of these events that we're going through, it's all divine synchronicity. It's all a part of a divine plan. It's what makes what we're doing possible. And I think that we'll talk more about some of those things at a future date, because we've kind of dropped a lot of information on people today. But I would say that, we to speak of those and another affirmation that this event is not the end of everything, but more like a benchmark.
Major marker.
We had this major solar event, the solar eclipse that happened last year on the 21st of August that went across the United States.
Right.
Well, that ended, according to the galactic beings that I communicated with, ended a 7-year initiation process for what I call ascension pioneers. So the people that are awake and aware right now in full consciousness. Now then we entered into a second 7-year cycle, and this 7 years spans until April 18th of 2024, where there will be a second solar eclipse, total solar eclipse, that goes across the United States in the opposite direction. From Mexico to Maine, and creates an X over the United States, with the axis of that X being in the Bible Belt. And so...
Auspicious,
funny, right?
yes, very auspicious. Keep going.
So this work that's happening now, this solar event that's happening right now, is pushing things along so that we can really utilize this next 7 years to wake up humanity, the rest of the sleeping masses, into reality and prepare them for the new world that we're creating. And so that is going to take some more time to do. There's going to be we've already seen a lot of cognitive dissonance where people refuse the reality that's right in front of them because it's just too much for them to bear.
Right.
And also, it's time for us that have been awake for this period to go forth and to teach what we've learned, to teach what we know. Because after the Band-Aid is ripped off, people are going to have a lot of questions. When everything that you thought was fact is now fiction. And the heroes that you put up on pedestals are actually your oppressors. And the stories that you've lived your life by and the identity that you've adopted through your religion, through your way of living, through your work, all of this is stripped from you.
Including the history of the world, which will be rewritten.
What do you do with that? How do you come to terms with that?
Right.
It's up to us to do our part to be that net, that safety net for these people that are taking the leap.
Okay.
And to embrace them and turn them towards the light and show them the path so that they can follow along and that we can all be somewhere better.
Yeah, sort of like as, if you will, a mentor and a way shower that when all the dust settles, if you will, we're all going to be okay. It's an evolutionary path.
Absolutely. And another element to this, and there's a movie coming out on the 9th that's called A Wrinkle in Time, and it's about interdimensional travel, and it's about the world that we live in and the universe that we live in. And it's got a lot of really amazing concepts that are being presented to people. But at the end of that trailer for that movie, in bold words that come across the screen that I think everybody should be aware of and everybody should hear, is the only way to overcome the darkness is by becoming the light.
Yeah, very, very relevant.
And in closing, I know we're kind of running out of time, but I wanted to sort of hint at something we're going to talk about next time is Marduk is dead. And Miss M is going to tell you a little story about why we know that. I mean, we had agency confirmation as well. This was a couple of years ago, but we'll get more into that. But all these great things that are happening has been able to occur because the tide has turned. You know, the scales have tipped. You know, a lot of the top negative forces have been dealt with. And so the roundup that's happening now, that's happening in coming days even, is kind of just the last of what needs to be done so we can get started with all this goodness. We do have a GCR planned. We do have, you know, new ways that we'll be dispensing money that we're working on. All these things shall come to pass soon.
A lot of positive things happening. It's a really exciting time to be alive. It's a really exciting time to be a part of this. We will go into depth a little bit more about our other two partners in the next episode and introduce you to them and the work that they've been doing on your behalf. And so we look forward to coming back and sharing some more.
Well, this has been absolutely amazing. M and Miss M, thank you very much for all of this information in segment 2. And so for myself, Tolec, and the Andromeda Council, M and Miss M, we will be speaking with you again in another couple of weeks. Take care, and thanks for listening.